Belarusian soldiers, they don't really want to fight for Putin and Lukashenko. There is a kind of consensus in Belarus society. 86% Belarusians are against Belarus participation in the war. Very hard for Putin and Lukashenko to convince Belarusian army to enter this war.
Now, Ukraine will tighten the defence of its border with Belarus over fears of fresh Russian attacks. It comes hours after Vladimir Putin visited Minsk to meet with the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Earlier, I spoke to Franak Viacorka. He's a senior advisor to Belarus's national leader, Lukashenko's main opposition leader, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And I asked Franak first what he makes of the significance of President Putin's meeting with the Belarusian leader.
That's a very concerning visit because it happens amid the war. And for Putin, it's kind of surprising for him to go somewhere. Usually he spends most of his time in Moscow. For Lukashenko, it's a big advantage and a big benefit. Putin was ignoring him for many years. And right now, he was somehow awarded by this visit because it's a sort of legitimization of Lukashenko.
And we've had some fairly general comments from the two leaders. What do we know of what was discussed?
So we know very little from official press releases. They discussed the cooperation in economic spheres, in the military spheres. They spoke about S-400 missile system deployment in Belarus territory. But I think the most important things, the independence of Belarus, the integration between Belarus and Russia, was kept behind the scenes. And I think in the next few weeks we will know much more information. It's very disturbing what Lukashenko has said. He was speaking about the sovereignty, about the constitution. If he speaks about it, it means they really discuss something bad.
Yeah, because Belarus is one of Russia's few remaining allies, and clearly Russian troops have been crossing into Ukraine from Belarus, but Belarus hasn't got involved directly in the war, which many had feared.
Belarusian soldiers are not in Ukraine, but Lukashenko's regime provided Russian army with everything else, with airfields, with hospitals, with infrastructure, with missiles, with tanks, with everything. But Belarusian soldiers, they don't really want to fight for Putin and Lukashenko. There is a kind of consensus in Belarus society. 86% Belarusians are against Belarus participation in the war. Very hard for Putin and Lukashenko to convince Belarusian army to enter this war.
Do you think, though, that this visit today perhaps will signal that President Putin is planning a further incursion, further movements, perhaps a further ground invasion from Belarus into Ukraine?
I think Putin was trying to encourage Lukashenko to participate more. He wanted to make him even more dependent from Putin. Lukashenko is a really comfortable partner because he doesn't cost much, but he guarantees the full control over Belarus. In the next few months, we can expect another try by Russian army to attack Ukraine from Belarus territory because Belarus provides the shortcut to Kyiv. But at this very moment, there are no signs that has enough troops on Belarus territory to conduct this operation, which doesn't exclude they will deliver more vehicles, more troops to Belarus in the next few months.
I know that you and many others who opposed Lukashenko's regime are out of the country. But what are you picking up about the mood of the people there in Belarus? Do you think that there is broad support for Russia's invasion, the special operation, as President Putin has been calling it, in Ukraine?
Of course, it's a war. It's a real war, and Belarusians know. And in Ukraine, thanks to independent media, restored their activities from exile. Belarusians are scared. People are really scared by terror, by what's happening in Ukraine as well. No possibilities to openly protest on the streets. But people, they don't give up. They join underground protest groups. They sabotage diversions on railways, distribute leaflets, collect information about the movement of Russian troops. So do all possible to help Ukraine to resist two dictators. because Belarusians understand very well that the fates of our countries are intertwined, and only the victory of Ukraine will open the chance for changes, democratic changes in Belarus.
So, despite the brutal suppression that we have seen by the Lukashenko regime on anyone who speaks out against their president, you're saying that there is still quite a strong amount of support for Ukraine opposed to the regime under which they're living.
There were people who actively participate in resistance in Belarus, and thousands of people who tried to join Ukrainian armed forces as volunteers, and they participate in the military action on Ukraine's territory. There are many people who participated in 2020, and right now they created the small communities to continue the resistance. And for us, for democratic movement in exile, it's very important to support this linkage between Belarusians who are in exile and Belarusians in the country, because they live in the fear, they live in the atmosphere of terror. There are 10, 15 people arrested every day who are being tortured in prisons. And for us, it's very important to give them energy, to give them inspiration, and provide them with real assistance to them and their families.
And we know, don't we, that there are still thousands of people who were involved in the protests which were so brutally suppressed, who are still in prison, including the leader of those protests.
Thousands of people are in prisons. They're without communication. They're kept in subhuman conditions, without heating, without electricity. They're not allowed to receive letters from their kids or from their beloved ones. A few weeks ago, several political prisoners started hunger strike. Maria Kolesnikova, one of the leaders, she was taken to the hospital to surgery directly from prison. Ales Beliatsky, who is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate this year, he was not allowed even to pass the speech from the prison to his wife, and he knew about the prize he received with a slight delay.
And how concerned are you? Obviously, the focus of the international community is on Ukraine, which itself has come under attack, has been invaded, but that the plight of the people in Belarus has perhaps fallen off the international headlines.
We feel overshadowed by Ukraine, but we insist that the West must support Ukraine anyway, because support for Ukraine means also support for Belarus. What we ask for, to not overlook Belarus and to understand that these two situations, these two crises, are interconnected. And by supporting Belarusian civil society groups, Belarusian democratic forces, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, you also support Ukraine. Yes, we have different situations, but we fight the same enemy. We fight the revanchist Russian Empire.
And do you now believe that there is any way that Lukashenko can be removed from power? We saw those protests so brutally suppressed. So many of the opposition leaders either exiled or imprisoned. Do you think that his regime will continue?
Lukashenko's regime is quite weak and fragile right now. He fully depends on Putin, and any change on in the war between Russia and Ukraine can bring him to collapse. He understands it very well. This is why he's sticking so much with Putin. Putin, who is the only guarantee of for his power. Lukashenko can collapse also due to split of elites. There are many people around him who are not happy about this integration with Russia, about support for war, and they're looking for the right moment, for the right opportunity to rise up. And I don't exclude that there will be new protests, there will be new rallies on Belarus streets when the window of opportunity appears.
Well, that was Franak Viacorka, senior advisor to the exiled Belarus opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, speaking to me just a little earlier.